Okay, let's dive deep into a figure who spent, what, 2 decades dominating football headlines. And, let's be real, headlines far beyond the field. Aaron Rodgers.
Absolutely. And we've got quite the stack of sources here. Everything from the raw career stats, biographical stuff, to news reports, commentary on his recent moves, and, well, his public life gives us a lot to dig into.
Right, and our mission today is really to cut through all that noise, pull out the most important insights, and give you, the listener, a really clear, well-informed picture. We're tracing his path from a pretty unusual college start
Yeah, definitely not typical.
through those legendary Green Bay years, that very brief, dramatic Jets chapter, and bring you right up to date with a surprising recent agreement with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And we definitely have to touch on that significant, often talked about off-field presence, too.
Oh, for sure.
It's a journey full of twists, turns, moments that kind of define modern football. And, the modern athlete in general. Should be fascinating. Let's jump in.
So the story doesn't kick off like you'd expect, top recruit landing at a major university. Rodgers actually started his college career at Butte College. That's a junior college, right? Back in 2002.
That's right, Butte College. And this was despite having, a really solid high school academic record that probably could have gotten him into a 4-year school somewhere. But his freshman season there at Butte, it wasn't just okay, it was standout. He threw 26 touchdowns, led them to a 10-1 record. They won the NorCal Conference Championship.
Wow.
And they finished the season ranked number 2 in the nation for junior colleges.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of production, even at the JUCO level, it definitely gets attention.
So how did he get onto the radar from there? Because that seems like a crucial moment.
It really was.
Huh?
So the head coach at Cal at the time, Jeff Tedford, he was actually at Butte scouting a different player, a tight end, I think.
Well.
And he just happened to see Rodgers throwing the ball and was, frankly, pretty surprised that someone with that kind of arm talent hadn't been, heavily recruited by the big DI programs earlier.
Right.
And here's the key part. Because Rodgers did have that good academic record from high school, he was eligible to transfer to a 4-year university like Cal after just 1 year of junior college. That's not the usual path at all. Most guys need 2 years. So that academic piece really opened the door for him quickly.
Okay, so he lands at the University of California, Berkeley, Cal, in 2003. What kind of impact did he make once he got playing time there?
Well, he became the starter about 5 games into that 2003 season, his sophomore year, and he pretty quickly helped lead Cal to a 7-3 record when he was starting. You saw the potential right away.
Yeah.
I mean, in just his second career start for Cal, he leads them to this dramatic triple overtime win against number 3 ranked USC. Huge upset.
Wow. Okay.
And then in the Insight Bowl that year against Virginia Tech, he was named the game MVP. Threw for almost 400 yards, 394 passing yards. It just showed he could handle the bigger stage, right from the get-go.
And it wasn't just winning, right? The sources mentioned he was showing incredible precision, even early on.
Absolutely. That 2003 season, he started setting school records already. Tied the season record for 300-yard games. He had 5 of those. And he set a Cal record for the lowest interception percentage, just 1.43%. That's incredibly careful with the ball. Then, in 2004, he took it up another notch. He led Cal to a 10-1 record. They were ranked in the top 5 nationally. Their only loss that whole season was a really close game against the number 1 team, USC.
And even in that loss, I think the sources pointed out some amazing individual plays from him, really showing that accuracy under pressure.
Exactly. In that USC game specifically, he set a school record with 26 consecutive completed passes.
26 straight.
Yeah, and he tied an NCAA record with 23 consecutive completions within that single game. He also set Cal's single-game record for completion percentage at 85.3%. I mean, just dominant efficiency, even though they didn't get the W.
Right, and the sources do note how frustrating that ending was for Rodgers himself, saying something like they couldn't get the job done in that huge game.
Yeah, you can imagine. A tough pill to swallow. But despite that loss, he finished 2004 leading the entire Pac-10 conference with a 66.1% completion percentage. Threw for over 2,500 yards, 24 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions.
Pretty good numbers.
And he even finished 9th in the Heisman Trophy voting that year, which tells you a lot about how highly regarded he was, even coming through that, less traditional path.
And then there was that whole frustrating postseason thing where Texas got picked over Cal for the Rose Bowl.
Right, that was controversial.
And then Cal ended up losing the Holiday Bowl to Texas Tech. Kind of a sour end to what was a great season for the team overall.
Definitely a disappointing finish for them. And right after that season, Rodgers made the call to skip his senior year and declare for the 2005 NFL Draft. Looking back at his overall college stats, combining Butte and Cal, the table shows he finished with a 63.8% completion rate, just under 5,500 yards, 43 touchdowns, and only 13 interceptions. And that career interception rate at Cal, 1.95%, that's still the school record for the lowest percentage. It really shows that pattern of ball security that became, a hallmark of so much of his NFL career.
And that efficiency definitely carried over to the pros, although, it wasn't immediate playing time, was it? He gets drafted by Green Bay.
Right, the Packer.
But spends those first few years, 2005 through 2008, mostly holding a clipboard.
Yeah, he was the backup, learning behind Brett Favre, which, probably wasn't the worst situation. But once he finally did take over as the starter, the stats, the awards, they just piled up over his, decade and a half in Green Bay. We're talking truly elite-level play for a long time.
And the sources really zero in on those MVP seasons as the absolute peaks of that dominance. Let's talk about the 2020 season first.
Okay, 2020. It wasn't just good. It was, statistically one of the greatest quarterback seasons maybe ever. He led the Packers to a 13-3 record, won the NFC North again, got the #1 seed in the NFC.
A solid team year.
And individually, finished with almost 4,300 passing yards. But the crazy stat is the touchdown to interception ratio. A Packers franchise record 48 passing touchdowns against just 5 interceptions all year.
48-5, that's insane efficiency.
It's phenomenal. He led the entire league in completion percentage that year, 70.7%. Led the league in touchdown passes, obviously. Led the league in passer rating with a staggering 121.5. I mean, that level of command and execution is why he was named first-team All-Pro and won the NFL MVP award from both the Pro Football Writers and the AP. It wasn't just gaudy numbers. It was near-perfect operation of the offense.
He hit some big career milestones that season, too, right?
Yeah, he did. Became only the 11th player ever to cross 50,000 career passing yards. And he threw his 400th career touchdown pass that season. In the playoffs that year, they beat the Rams pretty handily, but then lost a tough one to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in the NFC Championship game. And the sources note that loss dropped his record in conference championship games to 1-4 up to that point.
Interesting stat.
But he also won the FedEx Air Player of the Year award and was ranked 3rd overall in the NFL Top 100 Players list. Just shows how highly his peers and coaches viewed that incredible season.
Okay. Then comes 2021, and he does it again.
Yeah.
Another MVP year.
Yeah, although it actually started off kind of rough for him and the team. They got blown out by the Saints in week 1. He even got pulled in the 4th quarter.
Oh, I remember that.
But they turned it around quick. Went on a 7-game winning streak right after that. He finished that 2021 season with over 4,100 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, and this time only 4 interceptions. Passer rating was still elite at 111.9.
And didn't he break a pretty major franchise record that year?
He did. He finally broke Brett Favre's long-standing Packers record for career touchdown passes. Huge moment for him and the franchise. He was NFC Offensive Player of the Month for December, got picked for the Pro Bowl again, named first team All-Pro again, and then the big one. He won his 4th career AP NFL MVP award. That puts him in incredibly rare company, historically speaking. Only a handful of guys have won that many.
4 MVPs is legendary territory.
Absolutely. And he also won his 2nd straight FedEx Air Player of the Year award, ranked 7th in the NFL Top 100 that year. So those 2 seasons back-to-back, 2020 and 2021, just cemented his place among the all-time greats in terms of peak individual performance.
But his time in Green Bay wasn't always smooth sailing, physically speaking. The sources mentioned some pretty significant injuries he had to deal with.
Oh, yeah. There were several key ones that really impacted seasons. Back in 2013, he fractured his collarbone, missed a bunch of games, though he did make that dramatic return for the Week 17 winner-take-all game against the Bears to get them into the playoffs.
Right. Clutch return.
Then in 2017, he broke his collarbone again. Same one, I believe. That one required surgery, and the sources specifically mentioned 13 screws were needed to fix it.
13 screws. Ouch.
Yeah, that gives you a sense of how bad it was. He ended up on injured reserve twice that season after trying to come back, maybe a bit too soon. And then, more recently, his final season with the Packers, 2022, sources confirmed later in the year that he played most of the season with a broken thumb on his throwing hand, suffered back in Week 5.
Playing QB with a broken thumb on your throwing hand? That can't be easy.
No kidding. Playing through significant pain or physical limitations like that, it definitely has an impact on performance, Might explain some things about that final season there.
Yeah, good point. And beyond the MVPs, he had other major career highlights in Green Bay, too.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest one, of course, leading the Packers to win Super Bowl XLV against the Pittsburgh Steelers back in February 2011. He was the MVP of that game, too.
Not the big one.
And the sources specifically mentioned that game from the Steelers side as loss to Rodgers' Packers. He also got broader recognition outside of just football awards. Named the AP Male Athlete of the Year in 2011, the Sporting News Sportsman of the Year in 2011. Those show his status as, like, a major figure across all sports at that time.
And speaking of status, that contract extension he signed in March 2022 made some serious waves.
It really did. It was a 3-year deal worth about $150.8 million with over $100 million guaranteed. And at that moment, the sources reported it made him the highest paid player in North American sports history on an annual basis, even more than NBA stars like Damian Lillard at the time.
Wow.
It just showed how much value the Packers still placed on him, even heading into that 2022 season.
Which brings us to that final season in Green Bay 2022. How did that one go?
Well, it was a down year, relatively speaking, for both him and the team. They finished 8-9, missed the playoffs. Individually, his stats were just under 3,700 yards, 26 touchdowns, but 12 interceptions.
12 picks. That's high for him.
Yeah, that was his highest interception total in a single season since way back in 2008, his first year as a starter. And reflecting that dip, he was ranked only 51st in the NFL top 100 players list for 2023. That's a pretty significant drop from being a top 10 guy the previous 2 years. Clearly, the performance wasn't quite at that MVP level.
Which sets the stage for his next chapter, the one that was highly anticipated, but ultimately incredibly brief. April 2023, he gets traded to the New York Jets.
Yeah, this was a massive, massive story. And like the sources point out, everyone immediately drew parallels to Brett Favre's move to the Jets years before. You know, aging, legendary Packers QB heading to the Big Apple. It brought just immense hype and hope to that Jets franchise.
And one of the first things he did was symbolic, right? Changing his jersey number.
Yeah, he switched from his iconic number 12 to number 8. And he reportedly said something like, number 12 is Broadway Joe, showing respect to the Jets legend Joe Namath. It was seen as a nice gesture, kind of embracing his new team's history right away.
But his actual time playing for the Jets, it was almost unbelievably short and, frankly, traumatic.
Oh, it was just devastating for him and the team. Week 1, the season opener, Monday Night Football against the Bills, huge stage. And just 4 offensive snaps into his Jets debut, he gets sacked by Bills defender Leonard Floyd and goes down awkwardly, injured his left ankle.
And the diagnosis pretty much confirmed everyone's worst fears, didn't it?
Yeah, a complete Achilles tendon rupture. I mean, that's one of the absolute toughest injuries for any athlete to come back from, especially a quarterback in his late 30s, now early 40s.
Brutal.
He was immediately placed on injured reserve. He had surgery September 13th, and they used that internal brace procedure with the maybe overly ambitious stated goal of trying to return as early as mid-January.
It seemed impossible at the time.
Right. But remarkably, the Jets actually did open his 21-day practice window in late November. He was doing limited practice, and sources said he was cleared for, like, functional football activity, but not contact. Just the fact he got back on the practice field that fast was pretty incredible. Showed his drive.
But despite that amazing recovery push, he didn't actually return to play last season.
No. He was officially activated off injured reserve in December, but by then the Jets had already been mathematically eliminated from playoff contention after a Week 15 loss. So there was really no point, no incentive for him to risk playing on that surgically repaired Achilles in meaningless games. His actual on-field contribution to the Jets in 2023 ended up being just those 4 snaps.
Okay, now looking at the career stats table provided, it lists a 2024 season for him with the Jets. Team finished 5-12. His stats, almost 3,900 yards, 28 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, about a 90.5 passer rating. What did the sources say about how he actually played that year and what was the vibe around the team?
Well, one source described his play that season as, quote, solid if not spectacular. Throwing 28 touchdowns against 11 interceptions, those are decent, respectable numbers in today's NFL.
Okay.
But the sources add that his play, quote, often took a back seat to the drama of it, which suggests that even while he was back playing, a lot of the focus around him and the team wasn't just about the X's and O's, and maybe the team's poor record wasn't solely down to his performance.
Right.
Commentary around his play level that year seemed kind of mixed. Some analysts called him maybe a top 10 passer. Others thought he was more like about an average QB by then, maybe a top 15 to 17 QB in the league. Depends who you ask.
And that mix the team's struggles, the off-field drama you mentioned, maybe the contract and cap situation that seems to have led the Jets to decide to move on after that season.
Yeah, seems that way. The Jets announced they intended to part ways with him back on February 13th, 2025, and then he was officially released on March 12th, 2025. They used that post-June 1 designation.
It was just a procedural thing, right, for the salary cap.
Exactly. It's purely a cap management move, allows the team to spread the dead money hit from his contract over 2 seasons instead of taking it all in 1 year. Doesn't really change anything for him becoming a free agent.
And speaking of that drama off it, his life away from football has generated just a ton of attention, and it's covered pretty extensively in these sources we looked at. He's definitely more than just a football player in the public eye.
Oh, absolutely. He's cultivated a very public profile for years, appeared on Celebrity Jeopardy, won $50 for his charity. He even had that 2-week guest hosting stint on actual Jeopardy back in April 2021.
I remember that. People were talking about him maybe doing it full time.
Right. And he's popped up in cameos on lots of TV shows, The Office, Game of Thrones, Key and Peele. He even showed up as the Jeopardy host character on The Connors.
He's also done some high-profile stuff outside of football, athletically.
Yeah, he won the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am Golf Tournament in 2023, playing with the pros, and he's been in those The Match celebrity golf events a few times.
Right.
On the business side, he's had those huge, long-running endorsement deals with State Farm, Pizza Hut. You saw those commercials everywhere for years. And he also holds a minority ownership stake in the Milwaukee Bucks NBA team.
Okay, but the sources also dive pretty deep into his, let's say, alternative health practices and views.
Yeah, he's been very vocal about using and advocating for alternative medicine. The sources mention a whole range of practices he's talked about or reportedly used, things like oily enemas, bloodletting, vomiting protocols, homeopathic treatments. Pretty unusual stuff for a mainstream athlete to discuss. He's also become a proponent for legalizing psychedelic drugs, and he very publicly revealed going on off-season trips down to Peru to participate in ayahuasca ceremonies.
Right, that got a lot of attention.
It did. And the sources note the NFL looked into it and said it didn't violate their substance abuse policy. But yeah, these aren't typical topics you hear from a star quarterback, which is why they generate so much buzz.
And maybe one of the most discussed and certainly controversial aspects of his off-field presence was his stance on COVID-19 during the pandemic.
Yeah, that became a huge storyline. He emerged as one of the most prominent American athletes to publicly state he chose not to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And he was very critical of the NFL's health and safety protocols they put in place, calling them draconian at one point.
And there was that specific incident in 2021 around his vaccination status, the whole immunized comment.
Right, that blew up. When reporters asked him earlier if he was vaccinated, he said he was immunized. But then it came out later when he tested positive for COVID that he hadn't received one of the mRNA vaccines. Instead, he'd apparently undergone some kind of homeopathic treatment protocol trying to achieve immunity.
Which led to a lot of backlash.
Oh, yeah. Accusations of misleading the team, the media, the public, and the sources report that because he was officially unvaccinated under the league's rules, he committed multiple protocol violations. Things like attending team Halloween parties unmasked, doing his post-game press conferences inside without a mask, which was against the rules for unvaccinated players then.
And the league did take action, right?
They did. Both he and the Packers organization were fined after the NFL reviewed it all. About $14,650 for him personally, and a hefty $300,000 fine for the team. But beyond the fines, his stance and the things he said publicly drew really sharp criticism from scientists, public health officials, commentators. A lot of people felt he was spreading misinformation and potentially putting teammates at risk.
And his regular appearances on the Pat McAfee show became kind of the main platform where he voiced a lot of these views.
Exactly. The sources describe some statements he made on that show as false or misleading, like implying unvaccinated people weren't the ones most affected by severe COVID, or suggesting benefits from using ivermectin, a drug not proven to be effective against the virus. These kinds of comments led some reporters and critics to label him a conspiracy theorist. And again, just to be clear, we're reporting what the sources state about these comments and the reactions to them.
Understood. And his commentary hasn't just been about health. It's extended into political and social areas, too.
Yeah, he publicly voiced his support for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s independent presidential campaign in 2024. And sources even reported that he was on RFK Jr.'s short list of potential vice presidential running mates for a time.
Seriously. Alongside who?
The reports mentioned former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura and Nicole Shanahan, who eventually did become RFK Jr.'s running mate. But yeah, just being on that list shows how far his public persona extends beyond just football.
Wow. Okay. And the sources mention other less mainstream beliefs or interests.
Yeah, there are reports about his interest in certain conspiracy theories. For example, his former Packers teammate Deshaun Kaiser talked about Rodgers expressing interest in 9/11 conspiracy theories in the locker room, calling it a real thought experiment for Rodgers.
Hmm.
He's also publicly promoted something called the Tartarian architecture conspiracy theory online. And then there was that very public spat he got into with talk show host Jimmy Kimmel earlier this year.
Oh, yeah, the Epstein list stuff.
Right, stemming from speculation about his potential connection to Jeffrey Epstein, which Kimmel joked about, and then Rodgers responded pretty strongly on McAfee's show. And finally, CNN reported, citing sources, that in private conversations, Rodgers had allegedly claimed things like AIDS was created by the U.S. government in the 80s, and that he had shared false conspiracy theories about the Sandy Hook school shooting. Again, these are reports about alleged private comments, but they definitely add to this picture of someone interested in a wide range of alternative, often controversial perspectives.
Okay. And finally, just briefly, the sources touch on some aspects of his personal relationships, too.
Yeah, very briefly. They mention past high-profile relationships with actresses Olivia Munn and Shailene Woodley. He was engaged to Woodley for a while, but that was called off. And also his relationship with former race car driver Danica Patrick.
Right.
It's also noted that his younger brother, Jordan Rodgers, was also a quarterback, won The Bachelorette. And some sources imply there's been a distance or maybe an estrangement in his relationship with his immediate family over the years. It just paints a picture of someone whose entire life, not just the football part, is constantly under a microscope.
And that incredibly public life, combined with that whole on-field journey, the highs, the lows, the injuries, brings us right up to the absolute latest news, his next chapter, maybe his final chapter, the move to Pittsburgh.
That's right. Just this week, June 5th, 2025, the Pittsburgh Steelers officially announced they had agreed to terms with Aaron Rodgers on a one-year contract. Big news.
Huge news. And the sources really detail the process that led up to this. It wasn't like it came out of nowhere this week. This has been building for months.
Exactly. Reports about the Steelers being interested in Rodgers actually started popping up way back in early March 2025, around the start of the legal tampering period in free agency.
Okay.
He officially became a free agent when the Jets released him on March 12th. And then the first really concrete sign of serious mutual interest was when he visited the Steelers facility in Pittsburgh on March 21st.
A visit he apparently tried to keep kind of quiet.
Yeah, the report said he tried to fly into a nearby smaller airport, used a nondescript car, trying to keep it under wraps. But, a local Steelers beat writer broke the news pretty quickly. Can't keep much secret around the NFL.
True, and that visit sounded pretty extensive.
It was. Apparently, he was there for about 6 hours, met with everybody who matters. Owner Art Rooney II, GM Omar Khan, head coach Mike Tomlin, the new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, quarterback's coach Tom Arth. They even apparently altered their plans for attending a college pro day that day to accommodate the meeting. So clearly it was a deep dive from both sides, exploring if this was a fit.
And Mike Tomlin talked about it publicly afterwards, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He described it as a really good day they spent together. He acknowledged that while he and Rodgers had known of each other for years, obviously, from competing, it was good to get to know each other more intimately, as he put it, during that long meeting. GM Omar Khan also made some comments around that time, basically preaching patience, saying things like, time is a friend, suggesting they weren't going to rush into anything, and were letting Rodgers weigh his options and figure out what he wanted to do.
And meanwhile, another potential veteran QB option for the Steelers, Russell Wilson, he made his move.
Exactly. On March 25th, just a few days after Rodgers' visit, Russell Wilson signed with the New York Giants. And according to the sources, that pretty clearly signaled that the Steelers were focusing their attention elsewhere, likely on Rodgers, rather than pursuing Wilson themselves. It narrowed the field.
Okay, so the anticipation builds through the spring, then voluntary offseason activities, OTAs, start in May.
Right. And Rodgers was notably absent from those voluntary workouts, which, wasn't entirely unexpected given his veteran status and the uncertainty. Teammates who were asked about it publicly kind of downplayed it, so they expected him to be ready when mandatory stuff started. Mason Rudolph was taking the first-team quarterback reps during those OTA practices. It just kept everyone guessing, really.
But the waiting game finally ended this week with the actual agreement.
Yep. On June 5th, the news broke. Rodgers had informed the Steelers he intended to sign the one-year deal, and he planned to be there for the team's mandatory minicamp starting next week.
So what's the thinking here for the Steelers? Based on the commentary and the sources,
Mm-hmm.
what are they hoping to get out of this?
Well, Pittsburgh is clearly making a bet. They're hoping that Rodgers, now 2 full years removed from that Achilles surgery, still has enough physical ability left in the tank, and maybe more importantly, that his legendary football IQ, his processing, his accuracy, all that stuff, remains elite.
Mm-hmm.
One source interestingly points out that the Steelers have a bit of a history of bringing in, quote, talented, if mercurial players in the years since their last Super Bowl appearance, which, ironically, was that loss to Rodgers and the Packers back in 2011.
Full circle indeed.
Yeah.
And the commentary on his play last year with the Jets, while it was mixed, like you said, it generally seems to suggest he's still seen as an upgrade for Pittsburgh over what they had.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah. Even if his play in 2024 was just solid, if not spectacular, or maybe about average for an NFL starter, fitting somewhere in that top 10 to top 15, 17 range.
Right.
The feeling is that he is still clearly an upgrade on Mason Rudolph, who was penciled in as the starter. The hope in Pittsburgh has to be that being another year healthier, maybe in a new system, a new environment, could help him recapture some of that higher level play we saw before the injury.
So there you have it, a deep dive into the incredibly complex journey of Aaron Rodgers, from being this overlooked junior college kid to becoming a multi-MVP winner, Hall of Fame lock, navigating major injuries, messy team exits, and cultivating this very, very public life filled with unique perspectives and off-field pursuits.
Yeah, these sources really paint a picture of a fascinating and definitely complex figure. You have the undeniable, immense talent and discipline on the field for so many years, but then you also have this other side, someone whose interests, whose outspoken views on all sorts of things away from the game have frequently put him right in the spotlight, generated so much discussion, sometimes even overshadowing the football itself.
Right. We've tried to lay out the facts, the stats, the narratives, the controversies as presented in the material we had.
Yeah.
So now, as this maybe final chapter in Pittsburgh begins,
Yeah.
considering all that history, the incredible skill, the recent injury recovery, that very distinct off-field persona, what does this late career move really mean for his overall legacy? And maybe more immediately, given everything we've just discussed, what kind of impact beyond just the wins and losses on the scoreboard do you think we're likely to see during his time wearing black and gold?
That's really the compelling question hanging over this whole thing now, isn't it? Definitely something for you, the listener, to think about as you watch this next season unfold.